understand, but I want to make sure that you understand exactly what is in this document, what matters. Kind of some of these things are tough to read. Yeah. So first off, this was introduced by quite the dish, Kayleigh McEnany, yesterday. Here you go. This is her announcing it.
We keep hearing the drumbeat of where is the evidence? Right here, Sean. 234 pages of sworn affidavits. These are real people, real allegation, signed with notaries.
It's 235 pages of sworn affidavits. I want to go through what I think are the most notable. First off, Half-Asian Bill, can you explain to people what a sworn affidavit is and why it matters? Why it's not just, I think this election is bad.
And so there are two different systems. You have the state and the federal. At the federal level, the penalties are wide-ranging depending on the circumstance, but you could generally have about up to 5 years in federal prison.
And that's for perjury. Perjury applies to sworn affidavits, just like being under oath in court.
It does. I mean, when you are making an under oath statement in writing in an affidavit, it is the equivalent of sitting on the stand with a judge there and making a statement, again, under oath. Yeah. So in the state of Michigan, which is where these affidavits are from, they actually have even more strict penalties. It can be up to 15 years, and it's a felony. So you would have to believe that these affidavits are false. You would have to believe that someone was willing to give up not only more than a decade, potentially, of their own freedom, but also all the other things that go along with being a felon and the rights that you lose.
Yeah, and you don't want to be Michigan's next Ilhan Omar. Or sorry, Rashida Tlaib. Yeah. The point is, their affidavits, their hands on the Quran. These affidavits are very detailed as to what these people saw taking place. So let me give you one here. This is from page 17. The PDF is available to everyone. We'll have the link up here. On page 17, someone said that there were batches of ballots run through the ballot machine as many as 5 times. This is a direct quote. Whoa. At approximately 4:50 a.m., I witnessed a man spraying a chemical on a ballot machine. He then placed 27 ballots into the machine, and I noticed tape on the top of the ballot where a ballot number would normally be. Throughout the night, I witnessed him insert these same 27 ballots at least 5 times. What? Legal or not, Half-Asian Bill?
Sounds sketchy.
Nice edge.
And so here's the other part is, so people will say, oh, well, the people who are signing it have no idea. They're just being told to sign this stuff. But actually suborning perjury, so going out and procuring perjury, is perjury itself. Like, it's also within the perjury statute as a crime. Here's the thing. Even if you ask for someone to make a false statement and they don't even make the false statement, that's punishable as a felony.
Well, that's why I was getting into where these things came from.
The
crimes committed everywhere, if that's
process of it is made that has penalties that are involved.
By the way, let's go to CNN really quickly. They're saying Biden leads Trump by more than 5 million votes nationwide. Well, yeah, if you ran him 5 times. Running the votes 5 times is not a mundane detail, Michael. Here's another one. This can be found, again, in the PDF. I want you all to read it. It'd probably take you a couple of hours on page 25, page 116, page 122, page 138, page 158, page 185. We have over 6 eyewitnesses testifying that ballots not in the voter database were just entered using a fake birth date of 1/1/1900.
Oh, wow. Why would it's just a terrible date.
6 separate witnesses. Again, check up all those pages. This is also, interestingly enough, this is an excuse that's often used when we talked about dead voters going, well, we just sometimes they just enter in the 1900 as a birth date. That's also not a legitimate vote if it doesn't match the birth date of the person in question.
You're not supposed to correct it on your own.
Because there's one person here who said that their son voted who's dead twice. Now, all of the local news said that had been disproven, but they didn't actually provide sources to it being disproven. What I had read was they said, well, sometimes if they're part of a new township that's created, they'll just give him like a birthday like 1900. That's also an illegal vote.
Exactly. What? Fact check. He actually only voted once.
Right.
That was their fact check.
We have a new town. We're just going to hand out birth dates now.
And so here's the thing. It's like there were some examples where, the birth date was illegible. They put a placeholder birth date in there of 1900, and then they go back and they follow those up. And so even if, this is the entire problem I have with anyone going, no, there's no fraud at all, there's no irregularities, we shouldn't look at any of this, just crown Biden and move on, is there are legitimate irregularities that the system is already set to review. So we're not saying, hey, do an extraordinary review, don't do anything that's abnormal, canvass the districts, look at the votes, check the ballots, check the things that are irregular, and let the chips fall where
By the way, that's important. You just said canvass the districts. This is something I want everyone to know. It's in Georgia, for example, and keep in mind, too, the Georgia Secretary of State, this isn't anyone involved, even if they're a Republican, they don't want to say, yeah, I was involved in the most incompetent voting process that has ever taken place, even if it's not scandal. So they're not necessarily going to be looking as aggressively as possible, regardless of political affiliation, because it reflects badly on them as well if they didn't catch it. But this is something that was overlooked, and I would say even on our show, we didn't have enough time. In Georgia, people just think, oh, it's just a recount. Explain to people what the canvassing is, the recount, how that's different, a manual recount, and why it could change things dramatically and catch fraud. Because it's not just going, all right, recounting, and there might be different.
When you go to the different states, before they can certify, they have to do canvassing. And people are going, I can't believe they're asking for this canvassing. I don't know. We've only been doing canvassing our entire nation, like the entire history of certified votes. Again, not every state has it. Every state does it a little bit differently. All we're saying is do the process you normally do. And in an election where it's not that close, no one pays attention. But just because you didn't know canvassing happens and that canvassing is required and vote certification is happening and reviewing the irregularities and checking to make sure they're right, doesn't mean that hasn't already been the process.
That's what I think this comes down to, if people believe that this is legitimate or not. For example, just because you didn't know that canvassing happens, just because you didn't know, for example, it's like, I think that vote should count, but he wasn't born in 1900. Why? Well, that's illegal. I didn't know that.
It's not an argument.
It doesn't matter. This is from page 37. Regarding mail-in voting. Poll watchers observed mail-in ballots being logged even when they had no signature or weren't a registered voter. Again, you can find this in the PDF on page 37. We have seen this happening across, or many sworn affidavits across the country. Again, all of this is just Michigan. There are also numbers coming in that there are a disproportional number of ballots that just had Biden and Harris, and I can't verify this, but it hasn't really largely been disputed, where it's just Biden and Harris and not the rest of the ticket.
Nothing else voted
which is
down.
very
Very
rare.
weird.
And now all of a sudden you have ballots accepted, mail-in ballots, at 30 times the rate of any other election.
Unbelievable.
Because any signature is good enough. Think about that for a second. All of these things, and then something that is statistically observable, no one can dispute this whatsoever, mail-in ballots in the year, the first time they were unrequested, accepted at 30 times the rate. Rejection rate was 1% is what it used to be. Now it's like 0.03 something percent. Think about it. Those add up. Over 100,000 votes, a couple million votes. That's not a rounding error. That's winning a state. No. This is from page 107. A poll watcher saw poll workers duplicating ballots to incorrect precincts in order to run through 2 ballots for one person. And they said that they observed this repeatedly about 20 to 30 times.
So of all the different allegations, this is one of the ones that I think is a very much like there's no innocent explanation for that.
Right.
If they saw what they saw, and I realize they've signed and said that this is what they saw. But look, having worked in law, you see people who everyone will see the same scene and remember things a little bit differently, or there's some explanation. But that's one of the ones where it's really hard to think of how could there be an explanation. You saw the ballot, it had a precinct. You saw another ballot, it had the same person with the same votes, but with a different precinct, and then they both get run through. Right. There's no legitimate explanation for that, and it's one of the examples that we have to get to the bottom of. And here's one other point. Let's say that the presidential election doesn't change. Let's say that the swing states, the battleground states, they are what they are, and Trump doesn't end up winning. There's still a lot of other ballots that matter. We're coming into a 2021 redistricting cycle. Right. The state legislatures are the ones that determine that. So knowing that the ballots for those less popular candidates or less popular races is really, really important.
Especially when you've already had people who conceded, and then they were like, oh, by the way, you won by 1,000. He's like, oh, you're bullshitting. Think about this for a second. How would you not want to investigate an election where you had a 6,000 vote slip, just to flip, and they go, well, we caught it so the system works. Well, hold on a second. You caught it in one district and you're claiming it works. I would prefer that it didn't happen at all. Seems it's an oversight that 6,000 votes were miscounted for the wrong guy entirely. And we also have another in Michigan, a Republican who conceded. And then they found out, actually, you won by 1,000 votes, which in that district is a lot. That's a significant margin. This happened, just those 2 examples. Wouldn't that warrant an investigation of every vote in the state of Michigan? This is page 172. A poll watcher examined a box of ballots and found 60% or more had the same signature.
What?
That's totally normal.
Again, we need to investigate this, but this is a sworn affidavit.
Right.
That comes from someone in Michigan.
That's something that hand counting with supervision will find.
Exactly.
You would think
That's
so.
why they don't want it.
And this is a question that I did have for you, Half Asian Lawyer Bill. How many of these things, if you do a hand count, can be found versus not? So, for example, this is one you can find if they all have the same signatures. Right. But if some of these, secret ballots have been destroyed, like there are some things that could be covered up afterward.
Right.
Right. So one of the hardest ones are ballots that don't actually make it into the system.
Right.
So if they never got received, and that's, if there are ballot boxes or drop-offs and they just don't get collected or they get dumped or they get sorted before they're taken in, it's really hard because you don't have anything in the counting, right? The counting presumes that you already have, but there's not really anything you can do about that at this
one thing to be clear, it really only takes 1 or 2 precincts per state to change it. So people think it has to be widespread across the state. No, Wayne County is enough. In Pennsylvania, especially when you have some states that are 20,000 votes, or Wisconsin, it can be 1 or 2 precincts. So we need to be clear about that. You're not just talking about every individual's home. These ballots are collected in basically what are giant ballot farms, effectively, right? And then if it's covered up in Bristol board and they don't let anyone in, then now you know that you're screwed.
Watch Good Morning Mug Club live every Monday through Thursday at 10:15 Eastern.